Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Policies Dialogue hosted by UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, in short, MGIEP. My name is Maitri Dand, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. I would like to thank you for joining us. I would like to invite our director, Dr. Anantha Duraiappah. Mr. Anantha is the director of UNESCO MGIEP and a science policy pace setter with over 33 years of experience in driving education for peace, sustainable development, and global partnership. I would like to invite Dr. Duraiappah for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Midrol. I'm really happy to be here today for the second of this TAGe series. This whole idea of TAGe evolved when I observed actually a generational gap. And TAGe, as you know, stands for Talking Across Generations, and with an E, which is focused on education. And we find that there is actually quite a disconnect between the way some of the older generations sort of see how education should evolve versus the younger generation. And I think that generational divide is starting to emerge across many, many issues, as you can see from many of the issues that we are facing today. You can see that right from the recent US elections moving on across the whole globe. And so the idea evolved a number of years to have this, where young people, like the two distinguished panelists that we have today, have an opportunity to discuss with policymakers or decision makers who are responsible for the kind of actually the lives that we actually lead, as well as for the future generations. And the idea here is to have a flat playing field, which means that now no hierarchies. There is no notion of that you're the seniority hierarchy as well as the expertise hierarchy. We all have our contributions to make, and each one is valuable. And to sort of, for the young people to bring in that energy for change, the impatience for change is extremely important. But together with the policymakers who understand, who have the experience of in the fields, in their respective fields, and how to bring these together in a fruitful dialogue is the whole purpose and objective of TAGe. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion today. Unfortunately, the senior decision maker had to drop out, so you have the second best solution, a suboptimal solution, where I will be taking that particular role today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duraiappah, for the opening remarks. And moving right along, it's my pleasure to actually introduce our moderator, Simon Kuany.
Thank you, Mridul, and thank you, Anantha, as well, for the introduction. And everybody, welcome, wherever you're joining us from. As mentioned, my name is Kuany, and it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure, to be moderating the TAGe Series 2. I'll just quickly introduce my speakers. So Ms. Maitri Dand from India. And everybody, Maitri is pursuing a master's in French and Francophone studies at Go University. She is also a co-founder of a small company named Elite Inc., which manufactures industrial safety equipment. She is from India and enjoys reading novels, watching movies, and is passionate about understanding and knowing a new culture. Maitri, welcome to TAGe. And,
thank you.
The second distinguished young speaker is Mr. John Patrick Omegere. I call him Omegere, from Uganda. Patrick is a resource person at the Global Development Center at RIS, New Delhi. Passionate about international development cooperation, he is currently working on fostering exchange of knowledge and best practices among developing countries on successful development interventions. He's a graduate of MA International Studies from Symbiosis School of International Studies, Pune. I know Patrick quite well. He's like a younger brother to me, and so it's good to be sharing this platform with him. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Kuany.
And with that, good people, we're going to jump right into it. As premised by Anantha already, in the series 1, which happened in August, we discussed what ought to be or what should be the purpose of education. From that discussion, a few things came out. A lot of young people are very vocal about the fact that education today is sort of, it still as it was during the Industrial Revolution, and many of them wanted it to change. But when we were discussing, they were torn between education for human capital or economic mobility and education for fulfillment or flourishing. In fact, many of them were actually arguing for education for jobs, literally. And it took us like an entire month and a lot of discussion to move them towards, at the end, the final dialogue of the first series. For the first time, many say that education ought to be for happiness, fulfillment, or well-being. And so we captured that under flourishing. Now, today, we will be piggybacking on that. We'll be taking from there and ask, what are the components of an education that should lead to human flourishing, for example? And so before I get started, just few final housekeeping rules. Please use the Q&A for your questions and answers. I will pick a lot of them and interlace them into the dialogue. And whichever ones I cannot pick during the discussion, we'll pick them at the end. And now, Anshu, please get us started by just putting on screen the first 2 polls to just get our dialogue going. Yes, please take maximum a minute to respond to these 2 questions. Yeah, how happy are you if you're still going to school, or were you with your overall learning experience? And then how unhappy were you with your overall learning experience as well? And as we wait for the results, I think a lot of more people need to finish it, and then hopefully we can proceed and try and unpack that. So the reason to why we designed these 2 polls were, one, to try and you know, we have like a lot of knowledge, a lot of experiences that people are coming with, even those who are not panelists. And we thought maybe we could also try and understand their feelings toward education or learning experience in particular. And hopefully, yeah, it should be getting us something interesting, which we would then use for the dialogue. Okay, I think we've waited enough. And before we look at the answers, Anantha, just to begin with you, what was your response to these 2 questions, especially the first one? How happy were you with your education when you were still going to college or university?
I think the only time when I really felt comfortable, happy, and not stressed was when I was, bad stress. There's also, I want to make a distinction, there's also good stress. Is when I was doing my PhD, actually. So my whole my school experience was pretty much I would say a horrendous one, because I can't have any memory of it, which means I've already wiped it out. You know, I was caned quite a bit because caning was part of the system in those days. Always stressed in terms of trying to memorize for the damn exams. In a sense, you know, you really never learned anything. You just learned how to spot questions. I think that was the game that we used to play. Who can spot the questions? Well, it's not about who understands the concepts. The teachers, the only one I can remember is my first grade teacher, because I actually had a fluctuation with because she was really pretty, and so I can still remember her. But that's it. I don't remember any other teacher since then, except for my PhD supervisor, who's a mentor and a good friend of mine. Yes, that's basically my experience.
Okay. Maitri, the same question to you. What was your overall experience like? Happy, unhappy, or neutral?
I think I'm very neutral about it, because I kind of do agree with Doctor here, because as he said that even similarly, I had my school days, but they were quite blur, or even though it's not been that long, but I can still relate to him. And to be precise, I don't even think I knew what I was doing while in school. But right now, I think I'm more focused. I know what I'm learning, and I want to learn it more. So definitely, I'm more happy right now than I was back then. So I think I'm quite neutral about it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that you are more or less agreeing on some aspects with Anantha, not to mention the gap between. And so it tells a lot about the education system. You two should at least have as much as possible different experiences. But let's get back to that. Let me get again to Patrick. Patrick, what was your experience like?
Well, I think that I almost thought, well, first of all, my answer was neutral. As per the question, but I was a bit uncomfortable with that answer. I wish there was something slightly after neutral, which was tending towards bad, which wasn't there. So for that reason, I picked neutral. But I would say that my experience, first of all, it varied a lot, especially from beginning, from pre-primary to secondary school. I think at that point, I was conscripted into this society's conception of what education should be. So I think I was moving with the flow, looking at education as the ticket to the good life, and therefore walking towards that. But when I moved forward, I started getting a little discomfort with what I was getting in school and how it was delivered to me, and then how that was linking up with what I wanted to become. So that got me a lot unhappy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So sorry to interrupt you, but let's not get into the details, because that's what we're going to do exactly next. Okay. So maybe it's time to share these results and see how everybody else who is joining us feeling. And as you can see, it seems that majority, it's interesting. Some are like 54% are happy with the overall learning experience. And then on the question of how unhappy some are, 67% are about neutral, which is also something that is reflected on the panel as well. Okay, perfect. So now this is good point to get into the details. And so maybe going back to Anantha, most of the time, you mentioned teacher, you mentioned that you were caned, but let's start with the teaching part of it. Teaching as a component of a learning experience, okay? How much of that contributed to your overall unhappiness with your learning experience? Was it just teaching, or were you also not very comfortable with the pedagogy and other components as well?
Well, I think they are all interlinked. When I sort of say the learning experience, I talk about what. So what are you taught? How are you taught, which means the pedagogy. Where you are taught, that's the school. And when are you taught, which is in the time, in which part of your life. I think the reason I had difficulty in school was primarily maybe because of the very authoritarian system. But remember, this is many, many years ago. I'm talking more than 50 years or so. It was a very authoritarian system where it was a one-way dialogue. You go in, you were never allowed to express some of your ideas. And we didn't have the advantage of the internet at that point. But even then, there was times when one could not sort of say, what's the purpose of this, and so forth and so on. I think the authoritarian system was one that I kind of rebelled against. But saying that, this is one thing I want to kind of emphasize, is that the one size fits all is the problem. And I would say 20% of students might have really enjoyed the authoritarian system. That's okay. So we shouldn't go. Some people feel very uncomfortable when it's a completely open, unstructured kind of a system. They feel lost. So some need structure. I think the education system needs to accommodate that. And that's what I always like, the individualized learning kind of an approach.
I do agree with you on the system, which is an interlinked part of all these components. But if you were to unpack that system, and this might be reductionist, but is it possible to unpack that system and say that this core component of this system, like teaching, like pedagogy, that are far more authoritarian than the other ones, and which are therefore contributing to the overall authoritarian nature of the system? Or do you think even with this reduction exercise, it will still be very interlinked? Is it possible to reduce it to a few key components?
I'm a systems dynamics guy. I've been trained in modeling systems and dynamic nonlinear systems. So to sort of say that you can unpack and then think of it in discrete is, I think, the very problem of what we are doing right now. We can't. And I always find that one of the things that education systems should be training us is not in terms of actual facts, but it's about linking dots, understanding systems, understanding that the fact that I do something has consequences to others, which I've never thought about. So the whole notion of systems thinking is never incorporated into our schooling and into our education systems. So I would not try to deconstruct to a point of isolating, but we might want to isolate to understand the dynamics of that, and then how it connects and has an impact on others.
Okay, so maybe just to finish up with you for now, and before I go on to Maitri and Patrick, so what would be an example, just for the benefit of everybody, that would show how interlinked the system is? For example, what would be the relationship between, say, teachers and the pedagogy, as well as the curriculum? What would be? Could you give an example of that?
So, I've been fighting a war against using income as a indicator. All right, so I'm going to go from the macro down to the micro, down to the individual. Now, if you think about the way we evaluate success is through GDP, income, material wealth. And one of the things that we compute in the GDP is what we call human capital. And human capital is based on literacy, numeracy, and then wage rates, right? So you see it comes down. Now the education department is going to sort of say, hey, okay, we got to build human capital. What is the main things that we have to do? Literacy, numeracy, and try to get high income wages, which means then they impose that onto the to the teaching systems, and then teachers have been told to increase those levels. So they basically have been given benchmarks to say success rates. Well, how high is the literacy? So they just want to push on that. Whether you understand the concept, I always feel offended when people say, when you go to villages and say, oh, they're illiterate, or they're not educated. I don't think so. I think they know a lot of things that are very valuable for our welfare, and also the interconnectedness with nature as well. It's just that they are evaluated on our system of benchmarks. PISA is a perfect example, the one that's been used by OECD across many countries. And then they say kids from Singapore are much more higher on that compared to kids in India and stuff. I don't understand what's the point of this exercise. My always is be your own benchmark. If I have improved from the last time and I've learned more based on the things that I think are important, I'm educated.
Makes sense.
And you don't have any right to come and say I'm uneducated.
Makes sense. No, I agree with you on that. Good. I think we are coming to something which is the authoritarian nature as well as the intractability of this system. Maitri, before we go into details, what do you think of what Anantha is arriving at? Do you agree, or do you think your experience with your learning could be due to certain key components, or do you think it is this interaction between these key components?
Yeah, no, I completely do agree that, why are we taking, say, marks or examination results to consider ourselves as educated? It's not true, because there's something called as mugging up and chucking up things, which anybody can do. That doesn't mean just because you scored 100 on 100 doesn't make you educated. What makes you educated is how well you know your subject, how well you know what matter you're learning. That is the definition of education in itself. And to say that people have just misunderstood the whole scenario of education and learning experience is quite shocking and daunting at the same time. Because in that way, if I look back to myself, when I was trying to, go back to my education and my schooling, I was quite dumb to say, because I never scored like half the grades as a lot of other people did. But that doesn't make me stupid, because I overcome that. But people do make you feel so, and that's not correct. So, yeah.
Makes sense. As much as I don't like that you're agreeing with Anantha, I was expecting some disagreement which I could capitalize on. But now you're making my work very difficult. But no, you do
work hard, Kuany.
Yeah, you do mention a good point. But even when you were discussing online and with the youth also, it was uncanny in the sense that they were able to say for them, the teacher just destroyed education for them, for example, or they were able to say that the exams and the tests just destroyed everything for them. They were able to pinpoint this. Why is that?
Yeah, because I think I would not say that teachers try and manipulate and destroy a career. I don't think any teacher would want that in a real sense, a real teacher.
Of course. Unintentionally maybe, or the system is compelling them to do that.
Of course.
Assisting them to do that.
But it happens, and sometimes it's not in hands of teachers. But I think people were able to pinpoint that because maybe they have faced it once or twice, or maybe every day they're facing it. They're seeing teachers being biased. They're seeing education being the benchmark, or marks being the benchmark of everywhere, like everywhere they go, even in their family. Even siblings are compared that, this sibling is better in studies than you are. Why is that happening? And it is happening everywhere around the world. So people need to understand that it is very clear and people can pinpoint that out. But that doesn't mean that education system has a problem. In a way, yes, but is it really just the education system, or is it the society that is creating a problem with it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's a good question, and then maybe that's a question that I'll now extend to Patrick. Patrick, on Anantha sort of started us off to this this systemic problem that we are dealing with, which, however you might reduce it to understand the components, would in fact still need a systemic action to at least change it, especially for the very many for the few who say that education was not a very good experience for them. For you, okay, do you also agree with Anantha and Maitri that for you it was also the entire system in its complexity, or do you think there were just some key components that for you just sort of killed education or learning for you? Yeah.
Thank you, Kuany.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Kuany. And maybe I have good news for you, because I think I disagree with the two, with Dr. Anantha and Maitri. Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that I agree with Dr. Anantha in principle on the fact that on the need for interlinkage of concepts and ideas, in building one, and that would cut across subjects, ideas, and so on. But when we come down to education, my biggest problem, and this could probably be my own experience, was that the idea of assessment. One, I felt that I was cheated. Always I felt that the assessments was not a reflection of who I was, and that drove me in a big way, demoralized me sometimes, to be frank, and also that seemed to be the core motivation of running to class every morning. It was sometimes to establish that relationship with the teacher, who was sometimes biased, so being in class would get a favor. And also sometimes it didn't give us the space to go out on our own and to try out something new. So you had to go on the basic of a given framework. So for me, on that basis, I would argue that the whole point of assessment is a fundamental problem. Of course, others could play a big role, but if we were left alone and given kind of a liberal assessment framework, that would probably mean how maybe even if I cooked at home, for example, if that would form part of my assessment, or if I was doing something beyond school that mattered to me so much and actually built me more than going to school, I think that should be, it would have made my learning experience more happier. And I would be happy to have a rebuttal from others. Thank you.
No, that's very good. And I think, no, you raise a good point that, that a component of a system could become so fundamental that maybe it defines the other components within that system. But I don't think I'm the right person to respond to that. So I'll begin maybe with Maitri and then go to Anantha. Maitri, what do you think of that? What do you think of assessment, or the idea of competition, of assessing students, defining the learning, defining the teaching, and even to an extent defining why people go to school? Yeah, what do you think of?
I mean, in a way, I do agree with Patrick that examinations is not education or learning. I mean, we are assessed, like the assessments are done so that people would know that, okay, you have learned this much. It's for yourself. You should self-assess yourself rather than the whole education system assessing you. It's in a way wrong. And to say that only examinations or scores prove that you are educated or you're good enough is wrong. And also, I feel that why should it just be that I have maths exam today or I have science exam today? Why can't I have a cooking exam? Can't I have, I don't know, art exams? Why it cannot define me as an educated person? Because any artist or anybody to say is educated in a way or other, even if they go to school or they do not go to school. They are educated in terms of their skills. So yes, definitely, I do agree with Patrick on that.
Oh, okay. No, which is interesting because you've agreed with Anantha and you've agreed with Patrick.
Yes, the system is needed. The system is needed, Kuany, but the education system can change. We should change something out of it.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Let's eat this piece by piece. I promise you we'll come back to that. Anantha, I think you're better placed to respond to Patrick's idea that some part of the system can become too big for the system itself. And assessment for him or for a lot of students has become that. It has reached a point where it is beginning to define pretty much even the fundamental aim or reason of education. What do you think of that?
So I'm a bit confused because when Patrick said, yeah, he disagrees, I was thinking that he's going to support the present system that is assessment driven. But I was a bit surprised. He was sort of saying that it should not, and we should not be just based on it. So I'm struggling to say where the dichotomy is. Maybe you can say that. I'm not seeing that.
Okay, so the dichotomy is, initially we said that the problem the problem is systemic. The problem cannot be reduced to key components. You might do that to understand these components, but you cannot reduce it to key components. What Patrick is saying is, for him though he agrees to an extent with the systemic intractability of the problem of learning, he thinks that that the component of learning assessment for him is far more fundamental that it is bigger than the systemic problem itself.
No, the problem of the systemic problem comes from the components. That's the whole idea of system analysis. So I don't think there is a contradiction that he believes that there is. Assessments have basically taken, and this is where it's created new emergent properties of the system that were never thought about when that component was designed. So when I say that's a pretty classic property of nonlinear systems, is that new properties emerge which were never part of the original system. And where do those come from? It comes from the components. Otherwise, it doesn't. But then because of the interlinkages, it then creates a whole momentum. And then that's where the disruptions happen. So I totally, in a sense, agree that assessments have become a major problem because they have redefined the system, which means they have redefined what teachers are supposed to be focusing on. They've redefined what the investment decisions for education have. So it takes on a life of its own, which means it becomes the driver of the system. Now, what we need to now sort of shift is the driver of the system should not be the means to an end. And so I want to make the distinction between means and ends. The ends are always important. So, and the ends here is not about human capital, but the end is about human flourishing. All right. And when I talk about human flourishing, I'm talking about agency, which means the freedom to live a life you have reason to value, which is not something, unfortunately, that I define myself. This comes from Amartya Sen's work on human flourishing. So if we keep the ends always in sight, and Joe Stiglitz always, he did a fantastic lecture for the Prebisch lecture in 1997, where he sort of said how multilateral agencies always get their ends and means mixed up, that their means become an end by itself. And here, assessments have become an end by itself, rather than sort of keeping the fact that the end is flourishing. Now, do assessments contribute to flourishing? And that's the question we should ask ourselves. Does assessments contribute to flourishing? And if it does contribute to flourishing, it might contribute to some people's flourishing who gets excited by standardized exams. You have to agree that some, I would say that 20% of the guys who are sitting at the top of the pyramid are basically guys who thrived from this system. The rest have not. So we got to sort of look at the balance in terms of the, but I keep the ends and the means, and then ask the question: do the ends meet do the means meet to the end? And if it's the components of the system, does teacher training contribute towards human flourishing? Does student learning assessments contribute towards human flourishing? Do our investments in education sector contribute to human flourishing?
Perfect. Exactly. That's pretty much our second part of this dialogue, is to now investigate how these are contributing. If they are not, what should we do to ensure that? And thank you also for delineating the two things. And I think maybe I was looking for disagreements where there was none. But perfect. Okay, so I think we are coming to the half-hour mark, where I think we've tried to at least try to understand whether each key component is justified in itself. And I think what we are arriving at is, yes, the systemic intricability of it is what we need to address. Now, before we go into how each could contribute to flourishing, or what needs to be done to each to contribute to flourishing, I will put up the second poll just to check everybody's opinions again. And I'm having good questions coming in. I think I'll also begin to integrate them. But let's respond to the third question, which is, do you think, like what we were discussing, do you think you can pick, or at least some parts of this component, some parts of these systems that defined your learning experience as compared to the other one? And I think we missed one very good answer there, which was to be the entire system. But I think maybe overall school environment should do justice to that. Let's see. And as we wait also, there are questions from Natasha. Natasha is asking, could the panelists answer what is individualized learning? And how is it different from personalized learning? And I think the only way we can pick it within the discussion that we were having right now is it a separate component of learning experience, or is it a subcomponent of, say, curriculum, pedagogy, or teaching? What is it, Anantha, Patrick, and Maitri?
I think in many cases, people use that interchangeably. But individualized learning, as I see it, is based on choice and agency from the perspective of the learner in choosing one's own learning trajectory, as well as measuring their learning based on their own initial conditions. Now, I think we should agree that there are some things that we must know as a civilized society. Of course, the social and emotional competencies are a must in terms of kindness, compassion, empathy, and stuff. But in terms of the cerebral cognitive aspects, fundamental literacy and numeracy are important. And the whole idea here is how you are taught these things can be very different. And individualized might require different pedagogies for different people. Personalized might be something that uses the same pedagogy, but then addressed and designed for you in terms of your progress. Whereas the other has a whole matrix of different options that you could choose from. That's how I would think the way it would move. But then it might have been just a purely academic exercise to make the difference between the two, when in principle they might be interchangeably. Others might agree or disagree with that statement.
Okay, I wanted to pick Maitri's and Patrick's brain on that, but I think you've answered it sufficiently. And so I'll pose to them the second question, which is, and Maitri and Patrick, this question is for you. It is from an anonymous person. The question is, how do you make teaching policy or teacher training how do you translate it to the grassroots? That's that part one of the question. The second part, and the most important one, is why is it not showing in the learning outcomes of today? We've been talking about teacher training for a very long time. The question is, why is it not showing in learning outcomes? Patrick, you want to go first?
Well, thank you, Kuany. I think that the problem really, I don't know what the problem is entirely with the teacher training. That could be one component of it, I would say, but it seems there's so many other things happening in there. Initially I used to think that the problem between teachers and students are probably something my initial thoughts were maybe a generational gap. So maybe Dr. Anantha and our generation have a different conception of what actually is supposed to be. But then I also noted that even young people of my age who cross over the other side of the classroom, become extremely powerful all of a sudden, and the same normal. So in a way, I think that, yes, in a way, teacher training would be a big role, but I think somehow education institutions give teachers a lot of powers in school, so which comes, I think, down to the role of teachers in classroom. So I think when they accumulate this much power, it becomes then some sort of, many have called it a power conflict in classrooms. So I really think that it comes down to that relationship, which comes from too much power on the teachers, a power relationship precisely.
Okay, but just to pin you down a little bit, why is that not translating? Shouldn't that power help translate what they have learned? So say, for example, if they've been trained on say game-based learning or on SEL or any other thing, okay, why is it difficult for them to translate that into their classroom instruction and then the learning outcomes? Why is that not possible?
Well, that's a bit of an interesting question. I think that there are two complex things here happening. One, I think, is the whole setup of the education institution. So whereas the training of a teacher happens at a different set, there seems to be a little linkage between that training and how that actually gets to impact the education institution as a setup. I think I also note that some education institutions have different modalities totally. So in that setup, for the teacher to have a significant impact on the student, and again, considering what the defined outcome of that institution is, Kuany, you've been in India and many others, to many institutions, it's how many students are placed in the best companies and so on. And to others, it could be some other goals. So I think the distinctions in the end goals for different institutions have also significantly played a part in that.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Patrick. Maitri, do you want to build on what Patrick has said? So there is some sort of powerlessness, even if teachers are trained, which is something I'm struggling to wrap my head around, and I'm quite sure my audiences as well, is even if teachers have been trained properly on a particular competency, okay, when they go back into their classrooms, there's some sort of, the system somehow makes them very powerless in translating that. Could you build on that? Why is that?
So I think, as far as I have understood or I have known the system so far, I think what happens is that teachers are trained, that's it. But then when it comes to actually implying it, it's a whole different scenario. You need to build another level of confidence in yourself, and you have to do more hard work than it's actually shown. You have to do your homework. Even teachers need to do the homework before entering the class. And in a way, what happens is then ultimately, when you are talking about the system or the education system just driving towards, like we were talking about, just that we need to produce this many number of students who have acquired 100% or 99%. Ultimately, the goal becomes that, and the teachers are just stuck with that. What do you do when you are forced to deliver and have just that, your students should at least acquire this much of marks? I mean, the teachers are not going to bother about anything, like say, they're not going to incorporate games, because their main role right now is to finish the syllabus and let the students mug up everything and, you know, give questions so that they can answer, and so that at least at the end of the day, they would have the brownie points saying that, oh, XYZ teacher has so many students who have scored this much. And that is where, sorry.
No, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
And that is where the teachers are actually stuck between these two things. Is, do they listen to what they actually are taught, or do they go back to being in the corporate world that they are? Because ultimately there is something called school politics that happens everywhere around the world, and which is not healthy. So,
Thank you. Before I see Anantha raising his hand, before I go to him, no, you raise a good point here, Maitri, and I think, yes, there's some sort, and I think what you're arriving at is there's some sort of, even when they're trained, the objectives of their teaching are not changed. And so, which begs me another question, which I'll give you another opportunity to respond before I pass it on to Anantha, which is, okay, why are they not even integrating their training to the same learning outcomes or same learning objectives, for example? So if it is to produce, say, 15 students placed in high profile jobs, okay, why can they still do that while also integrating innovative approaches that they've been trained on, say, game-based learning or SEL, for example? Why can they do that still?
do you think they have time to do that?
Okay, because
no, like, just frankly speaking, the curriculum is so long that we don't know how much time do we have to finish that. And in addition to that, you have to then add up a gaming-based education, which is not easy. You need to crack your head open. The teachers have to struggle a lot, crack their heads, because I have been there. I have done that. I have done the teaching part. And but I know it's not easy.
Can they not weave it in? One
they
final
can. Question. Yes, of course. But then again, it's the time against race. I mean, it's a race against the time. You cannot compete time. You need to finish before July. You need to finish before your examination starts.
No,
how do you deal with that?
But Maitri, if a teacher is teaching mathematics, for example, okay, is it possible that the way of teaching mathematics, okay, based on his or her training, can be changed a little bit, even without having to change content and therefore take a lot of time? Can they change just how they teach? It can be even simple things like coming today and say, hey, good morning, I know you are late with your assignments. You can still submit them in the evening. This little thing that can be interwoven into the existing ways of doing things. Do they need extra time and space for that?
Maybe not, but let's just say this, that, you know, when you talk about SEL or game-based education or any new methodologies of teaching, it needs to start from the beginning of the beginning. You need to incorporate that into your education system from the beginning, for the students to just write up when you are in 10th or 12th, I don't know, for the students to understand that, oh, okay, we are getting into this. Now our mind needs to be into that cognitive mode or metacognitive mode for that. You need to prepare the brains of the students to do that. And that cannot happen overnight.
Fair enough. No, I agree. Makes sense. Okay.
I mean, yes, the teachers will need to put an effort, but from the beginning, not from any just way. You cannot just start from anywhere, is what I'm trying to tell.
Fair enough. And sorry if I've been cutting you off. I'm just trying to rush here a little bit.
That's all right.
Anantha, can you weigh in on what, where we've reached with Maitri so far, where we started with Patrick and where we've reached right now? What is your take?
I still come back to understanding if we frame the problem as a systems problem, if we get the terminal now in a systems setup, the terminal conditions are important because you need to know where you want to go to. But the path to get to where you want to is going to be defined a lot by where you are starting from and what we call initial conditions. Now, if we get the terminal continuously wrong, So I don't think we can have a discussion about pedagogy, teachers, and education systems if we don't get our end right. And if we say that human flourishing is our end point, and that's what education systems need to focus on, the maths that you teach will be designed such that it has to show that it contributes towards human flourishing. Assessing the maths of learning that you have achieved has to be such that it has contributed to human flourishing. And this is one of the strong arguments why socio-emotional learning cannot be put as a subject by itself. It has to be throughout the whole education system. You can't have a 40-minute lecture on SEL, because that's all I call it is a cerebral exercise and nothing more. I sometimes a little bit, I'm thinking whether I should use the term and not offend people, but this is a young group of that I'm talking to. It turns out that eventually it might just become an exercise in intellectual, what I call masturbation, in the academic circle.
Yeah, I'm offended, Anantha.
So it has to make sense to human flourishing. I expected my young colleagues to be more radical than what I'm pushing for, because if you move towards just human capital, you're not going to change things. The assessments are going to just focus on the same trajectories that we have moved on. What I was going to talk about is going beyond rhetoric. All right, you have policy, and also you know, following up on what Maitri was sort of saying, and that you were pushing her into in responding to it. You might sort of say, and we have all that grand statements of education for human rights, education for humanity, all these grand statements. But then when the teacher comes back and said, it's back to getting your students on maths and science, you have a dichotomy between the two. So you're saying something, but they're getting evaluated on another yardstick.
So to move to the constructive part of it, about what needs to be done. Before we do that, there's just one final question from the online chat from Dr. Sudha. Dr. Sudha is asking, and this links to assessment, which was going to be my second question, which is there any way that one can measure the learning in the absence of objective evaluation, even if it is with the best of intentions, both by teacher and student? In a way, the question is, how do you know that you as a student, you've learned something? And this maybe is for Maitri. This part of the question is for Maitri and Patrick. How do you know that you've learned something? And then for Anantha, the second part would be, if you are a teacher or an education policy maker, how do you know for sure that the students have learned something without having to use tests or objective evaluations? Yeah. So quickly, you have 30 seconds to respond to that question, each of you, before we proceed. Patrick?
Do you want to go first?
Go first. Okay, and I think that yes, I think the whole idea of objective is the point of contention, because we're not rejecting assessment. We're not saying that it shouldn't be there. What we're objecting to is the nature of it. And for that to be objective, we're saying that there's some elements that within the student that could be assessed and doesn't have to be the mugging and then having to fill some pages. So let's say that I mean, can I come up with my own personal project that solves a community challenge? And can I develop some passion for something? And I think from the teacher's side, you could see evidently that with some time, when a student picks up some passion for something within around what you've taught him, I think that could be a fair way of assessing how far he has come along in that way. Thank you.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you for sticking to the 30 seconds. Maitri, 30 seconds.
I think personally, I feel that if I can incorporate it in the day-to-day life, to say if I'm able to speak French with somebody who is a native French speaker, that means I've learned French. Also, the second thing is that if I can teach something that I've learned to somebody, I can contribute to somebody else's learning, then that means I have learned something. So I think that for me would evaluate myself.
Makes sense. Very good responses, both of you. Anantha, now, if as a teacher or as an education policymaker, how would you assess that Maitri can learn French, or Patrick can actually use his learning to solve a local problem? How will you assess these two things in a way that they want?
So I want to refer to science and evidence to address this rather than just, saying what I think is right. A recall button is what is important, is that you have a recall button continuously. So at the end of the day, we must have some working memory. We need to recall from previous knowledge. You can't just have an empty slate. So have the understanding of learning on a continuous basis, guide the student. Failure is embraced as learning, and you move. So it's what I'm against is this standardized assessments once a year or once every term. Is putting many students out of their comfort zone, and you're not really trying to find out whether they have learned anything. So do a continuous, and for Patrick, you can put those in terms of relevance to what his aspirations are. So this is when you come to individualized learning. And if AI is designed properly, in a sense, has all the ethical and regulations in place, it could contribute to this type of an individualized learning. But I must emphasize, with AI, we must be very careful in terms of the way the algorithms are designed, and it's not a black box, that we know what is behind that. But I would say the recall button.
Got it.
Continuous.
Sorry, you've gone overboard with your 30 seconds. Now, let's try and spend at least 5, maximum 10 minutes as we conclude to now try and answer the fundamental question. And if we can do that concretely, then that would be great. That would also be the takeaway for this dialogue. Now, the fundamental question is, now that we've tried and unpacked the components of learning experience, we now need to answer the question, is learning experience, overall learning experiences of today, with their components of teaching, exams, pedagogy, are they contributing to flourishing? And you can use any other adjective. Are they contributing to happiness or well-being? And of course, as we have seen in the poll, some people are saying yes, they do. Because some people are very happy with it to an extent. But our problem is for those for cases where they don't. So maybe Patrick, you begin. Do they? And if yes, okay, then why are we having this discussion in the first place? If no, what needs to be done? And you ought to be very concrete. And if you're not, I'm going to pin you down to ensure you're very concrete. Patrick, you go. You have about a minute to do that, or 2 max.
Thank you, Kuany. One, I would like to say that in the current state, I think they are not contributing to happiness, and there are a few grounds for that. Even before I get to different components, I really think that that the current system is very coercive, in the sense that we are pushed, and maybe I'll split that into different components that are coercion. And also I want to try and define education broadly and beyond even what happens precisely at school. I think it all comes from home, and we do not have that safe space at home to entirely go out on what we want to do. So in many cases, we have to go to according to defined standards, and school further does not create for us the safe space we desire. So we are forced to learn whatever we have to learn, and we have to be assessed again unfairly, I would say. So if I then come down to different aspects, especially the pedagogy, which for me has been a big component of my happiness or unhappiness, is that all I can remember from my school, probably the videos I watched, probably in my classroom, and the moments we had to go and play, and so on and so on. So those aspects of what actually...
Sorry to interrupt, but let's get into the concrete. What needs to be done?
I think the first thing that has come up has been already individualized learning, which has come up quite prominently. Again, I hope this would not look very simplistic, but I think the whole framing of school should give us some more time for ourselves. Do a bit of really soul searching. Let's sleep more. Frankly, we just want to sleep sometimes a lot more than that. So I think cut down the school time as much as possible. And again, this is a bit, I want to bring it up. It might be slightly political, but and maybe sticky. I think the curriculum needs to be decolonized a bit. There's a lot of content that we do not deserve in the curriculum. I don't see why, for example, children in my village should struggle with the content and the language at the same time in the name of being taught in English, for example. Yeah, if they can learn in their local language, that would be even better. I think that maybe I stop there for now and let the space for others.
Makes sense. No, I agree with you on the colonizing part, because I remember by when I finished high school, I knew more about the world than my village or myself, which was a little bit frustrating and alienating. I should sue my own school, especially the formative ones, if I have an opportunity to do that at some point. But thank you for that. Maitri, without repeating, Patrick, could you build on that? Could you build on individualized learning, decolonizing the content? What else do you think concretely that even if a teacher is listening to this dialogue, he or she should be able to say, maybe that I can take with me?
Yeah, no, I think I do agree with Patrick. I think yesterday night itself, me and my father were having this discussion where he said that, at least till fifth or at least till one primary section, you should learn in your mother tongue or in a language which you are much more comfortable with than English, because English is something which ultimately you are going to learn any which way. If you're going to go out in the world, you are going to learn it. And in no way I'm saying that you should not learn languages, but what we can do is maybe incorporate more of our mother tongue or language, which is like probably in India state-wise, to make students more comfortable and they can enjoy more of their learning rather than just learning, Secondly, I would also say that it is important to take everything under an umbrella, to have a base of everything that you're learning. But that's it. The base is necessary. But then let the students decide for themselves as to what they want to learn more. Like, let's say, for example, I don't know where to use cos theta, sin theta anyway. Why did I learn it? Why did I crack my head so much into learning something which I'm not even going to use right now? And sometimes what happens is that students or even teachers, to say, they're just teaching or learning just for the sake of doing it. But let's not make education like something which is very compulsory or obligatory. Let's make it more fun, is what is more important. When you learn while having fun, you learn much more and you're much more interested. So I think if I would have answered your question.
No, absolutely. And now, Anantha, and this is a...
Kuany,
yes.
if you may just give me a second before you bring Dr. Anantha,
Yes.
I also want to bring out one critical component. And I find this very critical. Probably this could have come a lot in the discussions that that you find, the employers have a different view. The cost of the training. And so I think one concrete solution that needs to come up is that we need to bring all stakeholders involved in education for kind of a discussion on the future of education, or rather even the future of the children in regards to education. So what happens is that you find parents sitting at home with the children or students, and teachers are struggling with the students in school. There is no space. For the 20 years I've been in school, there is no platform where teachers, students, and parents come together. And yet they all significantly contribute to the learning experiences of students. And finally, and this I would like to emphasize, and particularly if teachers are listening, that at the end of the day, at the end of 20 years that I've been in school, we might not even remember your name sometimes. We might not even remember whatever you taught us, the subjects and whatever. I don't remember what I did 3 years ago. But I think what comes back to our minds is really the little moments a teacher comes and asks you very personal questions. How are you doing, for example? And especially at these times, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And concerns for our well-being, for our career. That stays with us a lot. Thank you.
Makes a lot of sense, Patrick. No, I agree with you. I think we've mechanized, and of course, I'm speaking with bias here, but I think over time we've mechanized education, that we've squeezed the humanity out of it, that I think needs to be brought back somehow. The touch, the talk, these things go too far. And yeah, and I think that's why even in the discussion, in the online discussion, what was coming as things that the people enjoy when they were in school were these interactions. They did not mention anything to do with what they learned. No one did. I went through over 340 comments. No one mentioned that this particular lesson was very impactful to them, but they mentioned that my teacher, one day, they remember even a specific day, or my friends. I think these parts need to be integrated with the formal structures that we've created. So I totally agree with you on that. Anantha, there's a question that I think might be unfair to ask you, but I think you have more experience than all of us combined here, and so you're better placed to answer it. I read this sort of a quote, sort of a cliche that says, no one would give you the education you need to overthrow them. Now, do you think that somehow the system has been co-opted by design to ensure that they don't educate people properly? Because if they do, it might go with things. It's like, if you educate me well, maybe I wouldn't need even government. I wouldn't need even leaders, for example. Do you think the system is afraid of educating people properly because if they do so, they'll cease to exist? Because the reason why I ask this question is because every time it seems we know what we want to do, you see these really good reports, the system should teach this, should teach that, for 40, 50, 70 years, but somehow we don't even move an inch. We move an inch after 50 years. Is it co-opted, and all we are doing is just we're being cog in the wheels? Is it co-opted?
Well, it's like, one of these big conspiracy theories, abounding. I think the system has got to itself to a size that it has lost, in a sense, any steering. And so we go on autopilots. Many people are afraid to rock the boat. And then as you age, this has also got to do with neurobiological properties, that as you age, the risk-taking factor decreases. Your testosterone levels go down. This is known in a sense that young people have much higher risk-taking behavior than older people. This is well documented. So when people get into decision making, they tend to be very cautious about taking risk. And when you want to change a system that has been there for maybe 300 to 400 years, and unleashing a potential of where anarchy might arise. And I was thinking the other day about the whole notion of the world now going through with so many disruptions, especially with COVID emerging. People talk about riots in Paris, riots in the US, and people are questioning democracy and stuff. And I was thinking, if I did a curve or a graph of the number of civil disobedience on the vertical axis and on a horizontal axis, a degree of freedom from a completely democratic going right up to the other end of an authoritarian. And I think it would be a U curve where with full democracy, you will have high levels of civil disobedience because the system allows you to. That's a healthy democratic system. But as the degrees go, it starts to go down. But after a certain point, people can't handle the kind of authority, and then it goes up again in terms of civil disobedience and sometimes going violent and stuff. So
the system
coming back to your question, I would sort of say we are in very, very interesting times because of the emergence of artificial intelligence. I don't think we are in a knowledge economy. I don't even think we should use the term economy because we are society. We are no longer in a knowledge society. We have now gone to an intelligent society. When people were saying, what is the difference between personalized and individualized? I'm not sure if you noticed, I was doing a search on the internet and I had a lot of different perspectives of what individual. You see, it's in our fingertips. So I want to finish off with my favorite quote from Socrates. I can teach you nothing other than teaching you how to think.
Okay.
Because knowledge and information is just available, but we need to have the way to think of using this information in the most discreet, in a most intelligent way, as well also to not to be swayed by untruths. So what is true? What is a truth? What is a lie? What's a gray lie? These are new competencies that we need to ingrain with our young people so that when they do the search, it's not the first one that you sort of say that is what you take, or it's not the one that you really like because you already have already biased networks. That's again shown in neuroscience literature. We all are biased, naturally biased, is to be given the competencies to overcome that. So an intelligent society with an education system that teaches us how to think.
Thank you, Anantha,
and one more, and learning to live with nature. We cannot treat nature as a resource. We must treat nature as a living entity that we are part of it and not a part that we are.
Yeah, on that last one, I agree with you. And if we don't do that anyway, I think nature can just get rid of us. And continue to exist in itself, and so it's in our interest to do so. Now, I think this brings us to the end. I wished we could go on a little bit, but unfortunately, I'm not allowed to do that. Yes, Patrick, I'll give you an opportunity for final thoughts. But I think there's a question that has been asked that I think should help us close this TAGe, which is a question asked by Nira Pent. Nira Pent asks, how can education become more empathetic towards all stakeholders? And I think it's literally a question of these key components that we've just unpacked. Okay, how can they be empathetic for teachers, learners, and even for people who have somehow co-opted the system to serve their own interest? And so use that as the framework to answer and to also give your final remarks. Patrick, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Kuany, I just thought I would actually come up and follow up with Dr. Anantha's point of view.
You have a minute to conclude.
Yeah, I think it seems to agree that actually the idea of teaching critical thinking is very important in living together in a good education, literally, because the knowledge is everywhere, and we have to be critical about whatever knowledge we come across. My question to him would be that then that would seem important for the system, and the system here I'm going to talk about government and so on. Then critical thinking actually seems important to the government in that sense. So do you think that the government has actually the goodwill for that? And why is it taking them too long then? And I'm sorry for bringing you back to the same question.
Good, we should go back once. And answer the question is back, which is critical thinking in the best interest of the system? And I think George Carlin said the last thing anyone wants is critical thinkers.
Interestingly, the people that I read, and including Hindu scholars like Swami Vivekananda that I kind of adhere to, always says, question everything that is thrown at you. And if you want to take any leader, you must question them, and they should welcome it. A system that allows critical thinking will get into an equilibrium at some point. So I'm bringing back systems theory. The thing with systems theory is all about equilibriums. And how do you go from one to the other? You don't want to get stuck in one as well, because even if it's stable, that tends to produce kind of inertia in the system. So critical thinking will always continuously move the system towards equilibriums. And it's always pushing for higher equilibriums. So you can be stuck in a low equilibrium. It's an equilibrium, so you're comfortable. But you could go to a higher equilibrium, and it could produce flourishing. And to move there, you need to perturb the system, as we call it. And critical thinking might be those perturbations that are required to push you out into that equilibrium to a higher equilibrium.
Why is it taking too long then?
Are we really critically thinking?
Because young people have to take that momentum, take that risk taking that they are endowed with biologically, and with working with the policymakers, give them that agency and freedom to be part of the decision-making process. I will only end with, do not resort to violence. It must be peaceful, and things will turn out, because that's the one thing that we have learned from the man who's at the back of me and at the back of Kuany, is that non-violence produces the optimal solution, although the trajectory and the path may be a little bit longer.
Thank you, Anantha. Maitri, you wanted to say something, and then we need to really wrap up. Otherwise,
yes, Kuany, thank you. I was just saying that, are we as young learners or young people, are we really critically thinking? Is my question to everybody out there. Are we really, really critically thinking about every single thing that is thrown at us? Because if we are, then I don't think that it would be just four of us talking here. We would have a massive panel.
But how can you be if you're not being taught to be critical thinkers? How can young people be? They have to teach themselves.
See, I feel that critical thinking only comes when you're curious about something. You can only critically think when you are curious to know something, when you are curious to know that, okay, why is it white and why is it not called black? I don't know. I want to know more about it. And that's when you go on and critically think about things that are happening in life or in day-to-day life, to say on a bigger scale as well. And like Dr. said, that it is quite important for us to focus on not just being peaceful, but also it is a slow process, but you need to kickstart it somewhere. And where is the question? Where do you start it?
No, I agree with you that, I think we can also begin to train ourselves to be critical while we wait for the institutions to help us with that. So we need not wait. I agree with you on that. Final thoughts, very quickly, starting with you, Patrick, just final key takeaways or concluding thoughts, and then Maitri, and then Anantha, and then we call it a day. Patrick.
Yeah, I think I'll also be trying to attempt the question that you asked last of actually how to train empathetic young people from education institutions. I think we should harness more from diversity of classrooms as much as possible, and that too, and just go beyond diversity, because again, like Dr. Anantha pointed out, there's that whole rhetoric that we should harness diversity and so on. But again, you're bringing students into class and you're keeping them in class up to 8 p.m. in the night. So they actually don't have time to go along with one another, to interact with one another and so on. So I really think that more freer space. Again, I didn't emphasize the aspect of rules in schools. I think more space for us to do our own things, for us to do more interaction. And that interaction may not necessarily even go to eat on the teacher's time in class. I also think that even if we encourage that interaction in the form of peer learning between students, that would go a long way it would maybe even go a long way in enhancing knowledge flow for the purpose of personal development. So yes, okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Maitri.
Okay. Summing it up, I think it is important to be knowledgeable, to know what you want to learn firstly. You should know what you want to learn for you to learn something. And I feel that let's not blame each other and play this blame game, but instead let's find solutions, and let's start building a society which is more accepting, which is more agreeable, and which is more happy to live in. I think when we build a society that is more empathetic, to say, or more peaceful, we would automatically start having an education system which is much more smarter, much more, as we pointed out, critical thinkers. We will get more critical thinkers, we will get more empathetic people out, and we will have more learned rather than just educated people, which is much important.
Thank you, Maitri. Anantha, 1 minute, one final thoughts.
Kuany, just one call of action. Finally, I think the students should not wait for anyone to come after them. They should go all out and search for whatever they want. Yeah, we shouldn't wait for the all to come and really.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anantha, your concluding thoughts.
I don't have any, because what has been said by the previous two are ample enough. I am optimistic that change will happen if we have young people like the two who have been on this panel, and I'm sure many, many more, who will take the baton for change, the baton for change. So
thank you, Anantha. We come to the end of the first dialogue of the TAGe discussion. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now I'll pass it on to Mridul. Thank you, Anantha. Thank you, Maitri. And thank you very much, Patrick. It was an absolute pleasure. Mridul, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Kuany.
Thank you, Kuany. So this was our first TAGe dialogue of Reimagining Series 2 on the learning experiences and space. I would like to thank the moderator, the panelists, and the team working in the background, and above all the participants here. All of your questions are very important, as these help the speakers to be more focused. Please note that this dialogue will complement the 4 weeks of online consultation and be synthesized in a policy brief, and that will significantly shaped by young people, young learners themselves. And all of these virtual dialogues, the survey, your questions, and these answers will contribute to the Future of Education initiative and the International Science and Evidence-Based Education Assessment, which we call IC. And of course, the global discourse on the education. On behalf of UNESCO MGIEP, I thank you all for making time in your busy schedule for joining us here this morning, evening, or afternoon. Wish you a pleasant day. Thank you so much.